Burton Silverman, this is a huge honor to have you on the show.
Just as a preface to this, I think I was in the mood at this point in my life of not pontificating is the wrong word, but not offering judgments anymore about what ought to be or what I prefer, or because they generate a kind of sense of old battles that were lost. And I wanted to clear the air so that something could evolve in who I am as an artist that was absent all of the conflicts, the problems, the issues, and so on. But interestingly, and the reason I agreed to this is I can't escape something I think that's happened in the realist world that becomes increasingly problematic for me.
Really?
You know, there's an old slogan, be careful what you wish for.
Mm-hmm.
Many, many years ago, I was caught up with the idea of a kind of crusade that, in fact, when I say many years ago, it goes back to the to the late 1950s, when the group of artists connected with the Davis Gallery set up the idea of a group exhibition that, in the face of abstract expressionism and Jackson Pollock and the whole crew, would provide a counterpoint. Not necessarily an armory show counterpoint, like this is going to upset what was now a burgeoning, almost tornado-like affection for the non-image in art.
Mm-hmm.
And we were going to put up a little, and I said, wait a minute, here, there's something else going on. And of course, it was just a horrific failure. First of all, historically, it was the wrong moment. Secondarily, it was organized on a very limited kind of self-involved basis, like just the 11 artists, when it should have been 110 artists.
Who were the artists besides yourself?
I'm sorry.
Who were the artists besides yourself?
They were mostly people at Davis Gallery. It's Harvey Dinnerstein, Daniel Schwartz, David Levine, Aaron Schickler, Julian Fishburne, Herbert Steinberg. I forgot the name of the sculptor. We had a lone sculptor in the show, and Stuart Kaufman.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that adds up to 11. But
no, not quite, but that's a pretty good taste of it.
And it was presumptuous in a way. It was a measure of our innocence and lack of sophistication that we suggested to an ongoing thunderous acceptance of the new art, because from any vantage point it was new, it was bold, it was colorful, it was huge compared to the work that we had done by and large, and that was shown at the gallery, at Davis Gallery, which in a way was kind of should have given us a warning, which is an almost a boutique gallery. It's in the basement floor of a brownstone on East 61st Street, or maybe 63rd. We're going back 70 years, so excuse me.
Yeah, this is amazing. Slice of history here.
But the point is, the historical moment seemed important for us, and it seemed urgent, and it was also something else. I think it was ego stirred. We wanted to be considered relevant that we're not just tucked away on the east side in a little gallery, but we were commanding a larger audience, or commanding an audience of people who were not only interested, but supported. And that's a key word, who supported contemporary realism, as we like to think of ourselves. The point I was making is that I was kind of the lead theoretician. I wrote much of the catalog and much of the theoretical basis on which we felt we were taking a stand. Well, of course, it came to one giant nothing.
No sales
That
at
being
all?
said, it was interesting because there was a community around that about
Mm-hmm.
2 or 3 months after the exhibition closed, which was called "Oh Realist View," not "The Realist View," which is different from the indefinite article. There was a show organized by, I think, Herschel Nadler, called 75 Years of Realism. Included, I must be 40 or 50 artists. It also was not particularly reviewed in any historical context. The history of art has been so distorted in a way, as if the continuity between Picasso and the abstract expressionist movement is not this much art historically, but like one on top of another. It seemed to be the logical sequence, and the literature surrounding it. The literature meeting was, as my dear friend, oh my God, I suddenly forgot his name, but I will in a moment, writer, and he characterized it by an article, I think it was a book called "The Spoken Word."
Mm-hmm.
And it was a way of suddenly, like, he introduced the beginning of the book. He was reading the New York Times on a Sunday afternoon.
Are you
He
referring to the
started
painted
reading
word? Is it the spoken word or the painted word?
Yes, I'm
Yes, I've
sorry.
read that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Forgive my slips here,
No, that's
because
okay. You're doing good. I couldn't
the
believe you came up
engine
with 8
is
names.
the engine is slowing down. Anyway, and what he did was characterize it in a unique way, that he didn't know what he was seeing until he read the New York Times
Mm-hmm.
and told him what he was seeing. And it was loudly denounced by the art community. Well, he really doesn't know that much about art history, and he's really kind of a society writer and all that kind of. So it was pushed aside and neutralized. It had no currency also, and it's funny because Tom was a friend. He urged me to make landscapes of the tortured city. I wasn't a landscape painter, but he had certain views about art. And he was a totally refined conservative. That's a nice way for saying he was really out of it. And
Okay.
and that is continued almost uninterrupted from all of my career, incredibly right up to the present moment, where it's now been entangled with something else. The art historical record apparently was in derelict in a terrible way. They forgot about women, blacks, and other people who are marginalized in the art history paradigm. But, that was not true either. That was a kind of false democratization, because women artists of talent, somehow or other, starting with Judith Lester way back in the 18th century in Holland, had dramatic paintings in museums all over the world. I mean, just one artist. Forget about the tons of women artists who are neglected, but the tons of old Jewish artists that are neglected also. I've got news for you. Even the ones that hid behind the pseudonym, like like Modigliani, okay, until he was near death. And all of these people are resurrected from the kind of exclusion that the ongoing critical establishment had, until somebody said, oh, no, you conceived that in a totally erroneous fashion. So here I am, 70 years later, and in a kind of conundrum. Because I look up and I see tons and tons of extraordinarily gifted, talented people making paintings that are increasingly, and this is going to go down very hard, increasingly uninteresting, if not terribly repetitious. I don't see any individual stamp, because in a way, not only from the way something is painted, but what is being painted. I can show you reams and reams of painting of soulful women gazing up in the sky, or clutching a flower, or looking supine on a bench. I mean, it was the 19th Century Academy painting nudes repetitiously repeated again and again, because there was, again, an inference of the frail female, or the alluring female, waiting for some heroic male to seduce them. And I could show you again tons of paintings from, what's his name? The biggest name in the French Academy. And it was discarded because of several reasons. One, because it was increasingly unrelated to what people in the late 19th century experienced.
Are you referring to Bouguereau?
Bouguereau, yeah. And it made for a perfect time for all the craziness that would result from a gigantic dislocating World War I, which was also decried as not a fake war, but a war for no reason, which thousands and thousands of people died. The French male was going to be decimated. It wouldn't grow to a normal height for 25 years or something like that. Whole generations were distorted. And with that disruption came an equivalent destruction, even with the Impressionists, who were hardly revolutionaries. They were painting conventional landscapes along the Seine River, some of them not conventional, like, my favorite was, with it begins with a P, help me out.
Pissarro.
Pissarro, yeah. Thank you. You see what happens to memory.
Yeah, you're doing great. I have a terrible memory already too.
Listen, I lived in an unconscionably long amount of time. I'm 96 years old.
You turned 97 this year, right?
No, 97. Yeah, right.
Wow.
Right.
That's amazing.
And in a few months, like 5 months. And they go by more quickly than ever. Mostly because, again, perception is a very tricky thing about everything, including the durability of a second. And it's measured by activity. If you're under pressure, time seems to go by very quickly, okay? And if you're not, it's very slow. People get bored and say, it's only 5 minutes. I've been sitting here, I thought, for half an hour.
Yeah, plus, when you've been alive 97 years, 5 months is a small slice of your total experience.
Well, exactly. But there is a continuity, which I went back in history to talk about. The expectations we had for that show were enormously disproportionate to what it really could have achieved. And by the way, the paintings in it, many of them were quite large. And then I know there was a sensibility among people in the gallery that they wanted to have paintings that matched the size of not just
A Pollock or a Picasso or
a Pollock is Picasso's big mural, where like a side. All of the paintings, Franz Klein, huge painting. What was it? What was it? It was a graphic brushstroke, but it was made big, and therefore it implied, this must be important. Look at how it fills the space, and look at how interesting that black mark is.
I can't tell if you're being sarcastic. I think you are.
I should smile a bit. Yeah.
Because I'm not 100% sure where you stand. I'm figuring it out as you go.
Yeah, because I'm sliding back and forth between what's being written and what seems like an abuse both of language and our eyes, what we see. And it also destroys the art historical record. For example, all of great painting up until, if you want, the Impressionists even, were storytellers. They had no idea that they would go and branch into something esoteric, kind of like a philosophy that dealt with the history of racism. Okay, and that's also an astonishing perversion of the idea of language and what it means. And language is now so blunderingly obtuse that you don't really know what somebody is saying, but it sounds complimentary. So that must be good. Anyway, it brings us to the present and what I started finishing this diatribe about. And it's about my thinking about my own work too. I have to stop and say, what were the illusions I had about the things I was painting? I said, and it astonishes me that it provided inspiration for so many students, people who glommed onto it for some reason that I couldn't quite grasp, not out of false modesty, but out of a sense of astonishment. I didn't know what it really meant, why it picked up so much energy with the students and people and even collectors. And even
you have to know. You have, because I'll tell you why. Because I'm one of those people.
I know you are, and
yeah.
I'm saying it specifically because I understand that there were some things in the paintings that I wasn't aware of.
Yes,
and I think that's an important part of art, because I think it can't be totally consciously conceived. It has to come out of a complex of both rational conceptualization and emotional triggers, which are not at all understood. People have written tomes about what a painting or why a painting suddenly transitions into something almost spiritual. I don't want to give it a phony name because that has some sense of its own value. But I'm trying to struggle right now with what is it in my life that further needs my look at? Why do I need to re-examine all of the things that are both non-changing and radically different in my world? And is it important for me to make that statement? And I have to admit that sounds astonishing, but it's why a lot of artists stop painting after they were 90. The idea was Picasso in his late 90s, he did something like 9,000 paintings.
Hmm.
But that's not hard, because if you make a cartoon in the morning, you have lunch, you have some sex, and then in the late afternoon, you make another painting. And it really is an interesting life. You can produce a lot of work that way. And it's not hard. You look at all of Picasso's paintings, they're all based on a reconfiguration of the same graphic. It's the same graphic. So we have a significant issue with all the arts. People who write books or make music or compose, or all of those things have to do with there may be a curve of creativity. I do it across the screen. You top off at a certain point, and maybe it goes down that way because, listen, Hopper, for example, did no paintings in the last 5 years of his life. And I looked at his most of his production, and you see why.
How old was he when he died?
Excuse me?
Do you remember how old he was when he died?
I really don't, actually.
Yeah, I wonder how old he was when he stopped.
It must have been in his late 70s or 80s or something like that. But because paintings were about a singular, powerful theme, but he ran out of places to put that lonely figure in an environment. Think about it. The empty street, the near empty late night eatery, the empty hotel room, the single figure, the empty doorway of a seaside place, the deserted country gas station. All of those were kind of amplifications of perhaps his own sense of isolation, or the fact that they repeatedly stirred in him something that somehow or other needed to be articulated in a different way, in a different context. And I suppose people have accused me of doing the same thing because, in fact, I do a lot of that kind of a single figure in an isolated environment. It may be a reflection of my own feeling of isolation, for somehow or other not connected. I don't want to do any phony self-analysis. I'm only trying to deal now with what continues to stir that paintbrush. And I find that it's increasingly narrow.
How often are you painting now?
Well, in the last 2 months, I don't know if you can see it at the right-hand side of the screen. There's a still life behind the
flowers.
Okay, yeah. And I've done another flower painting, and I have in mind to do a couple of landscapes that have always intrigued me. Again, they're based on the idea of not people frolicking on the beach, but of something else. So that I'm not going to go into it, but it's based on some kind of emotional undertone that's in a lot of my work. It hasn't gone away for whatever reason.
You started a while back, you started going into your fear of where art is going and described some academic renderings. Well, what is that?
It's not just how I just saw thumb through the latest edition of the Portrait Society of America, of which I was one of the founders, because I said, we need something that tends to stir the great tradition of portrait painting, not just Sargent, but going back in time to Morandi, for example, or to other people who generated their own special sense of time and place. In spite of working in a manner that was within a very narrow range of recognition of realism, of painting fabrics, of all things which would enhance the subject. Again, portrait painting is another form of illustration. It's telling people, look how important this guy is. This king, this cardinal, this bishop. I mean, it was all, in a sense, whatever illustration may suffer from us being alive, so portrait painting is too. It's recreating an image of somebody which is fabricated out of thin air. So if all this sounds negative, it is, but at the same time, I'm telling you, I still want to take up my brush and paint. And it is not a conflict, except I don't want to paint what appeared in this publication that the Portrait Society puts out. And I said to myself, a soulful looking child and an uncommissioned painting of a woman holding flowers and gazing up in the sky. What is that to do with the contemporary role of women? What is that about? That's a kind of, and a nude again. A nude again and again. I think tits and asses, forget about it. We all know about it. I have a book, I wish I had it right at hand, done by a 19th century artist that is beautifully drawn instances of different varieties of lovemaking. It could have been called a sex manual. And I look at it with a sense of strange, divided understanding. I mean, these are beautifully drawn, beautifully composed figures in the most exotic and remembered forms of sexual intercourse. And it's published in a nice book, okay? But do we get anything like it in contemporary art that deals with the way people come together, both hetero and homo? No, it's all disguised as something, and I have to say this terrible word, saleable. The bourgeoisie of the 19th century and the middle class of the 21st. They have the same taste. They want something pleasing, something exotic. And I'm not talking about the high-level stuff. That high-level stuff is just garbage. It's nonsense. It's real. It's like crypto coin investing, in disappearing paintings or objects. But I'm talking about something that is very much relevant to yourself and myself, is where are the paintings going to go? Who is it for? Who commissioned me to do this painting? Maybe no one. Maybe the taste of the time has so gone away because I sell very rarely. I just sold a small painting privately because galleries have a problem. The galleries that are handling a lot of realistic work are of a certain kind. And they're based on the idea of something beautiful, not necessarily something perceptive or disturbing or challenging. I don't know what they would be in visual form, but I know that what I'm looking at now is none of the above. And it's all talent that seems to evolve in like a cascade. The millions, no, not millions, I'm sorry. Language has become excessive. And the thousands, you think of the art contests and like the portraits, I can't remember, the Outwin Bouchevet portrait competition from the National Portrait Gallery in US. And there's a National Portrait Gallery in Britain that has annual portrait competitions. And in 3,500 people apply for inclusion in these shows. Enormous number. You can tell that it's a very substantial part of the population by the number of art material companies that have grown up. producing art material. And at the same time, you go to an exhibition, as I did, a year ago, of work that came out of, I think, the school in Connecticut, the Lime Academy. All right. And I didn't know who did what, and I didn't know what I was looking at. All very expertly created. And I really apologize. I don't mean to be insulting, but the trouble with an academic rendering or an academic training is it's very hard to break out of that very comfortable kind of structure that you know you're going to get a certain end result in terms of finish, terms of look, terms of resemblance, if it's a portrait. All of those things are reconfigured. And in a way, it was, I think, and I'm not putting blame on Jacob Collins, because when he suddenly rediscovered the Academy, and he started his ateliers in Brooklyn, downtown under the bridge and so on, and it grew into popularity. Why? Because it was the par excellence of how to.
Mm-hmm.
And it invited all people who had the comfort of structure. There wasn't like, sit down, what am I going to paint? Where do I start? And I must say, subjectively, when I started out, I didn't look at how-to drawing books. I just knew I liked to draw something that looked like NC Wyeth.
Mm-hmm.
I got news for you. And that changed when I went to the World's Fair. I was 10 years old, and they had an exhibition of like 300 years of European painting. An enormously effective exhibition of the great giant paintings going back to the early Renaissance. And it changed my conception, first of all, about illustration, which was in a little scale here. And here was the world rendered in a marvelous exuberance of many different kinds of figures of light. Caravaggio was like, boom, thunderstruck. And it's interesting because Andy Wyeth has really understood that. He changed that. And again, if you look at Wyeth's paintings, they're isolated figures, starting with Christina's World and going through a lot of paintings that this black guy in the attic with a stream of light coming through. I mean, what tells you more about the isolated black experience? Did he understand that? Was it rational? Was it calculated? I think not. It was just his intuitive understanding of where people fit in the social order. And Wyeth is, I think, one of the more interesting American painters.
This episode is brought to you in part by Rosemary Brushes. If you're one of my listeners who's a professional artist, you're already using Rosemary brushes. But for the rest of you, come on, take your work a little more seriously. Stop buying the other brands. It's just not worth it. Every now and then you may get lucky and buy a good brush from another brand, but use the brand that professionals like myself are using. Go to rosemaryandco.com, link in the description or the show notes, and get yourself some quality brushes before your next painting. So I got a couple of thoughts I want to run by you.
Yeah, go ahead. I've been rambling on and on.
No. This is good stuff. But yeah, it really does bring up a lot of thoughts. So first of all, I think that you referred to that book that had all the sex positions and suggested that when you go into a realist gallery, there's nothing challenging like that, nothing surprising. It's all sort of mundane and academic. But that still exists, I think. Well, first of all, I have seen stuff like that on Instagram, so I know it exists. You're right. There is this academic revolution that's sort of drowning that sort of work out to some degree. But the point I want to make is it still exists in the contemporary or the modern art world. You still see a lot of that sort of stuff happening there. And it seems to me, and this is what I want your thoughts on, that the realists, by embracing academic drawing and painting, are rebelling against that. And my hope is that at some point we'll get bored of the academics, but this time not throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we'll use those academic skills to do something meaningful collectively.
It has to be, and it's personal in a way. It has to be a few people at best, because everything of value in the history of art has come from a few people who have been salvaged in a way out of the thousands who work in the same way.
Yeah.
I mentioned Moroni back in the 17th or 16th century. I mean, he was certainly the equal of anything Rubens would have done. And it was even more interesting because there was a kind of underlying sadness in his work that I don't think he intended, but who he was. Look, why is any writer using the English language, even in a special way, the possible juxtaposition of dialogue and event, and so on? It's been around for, Shakespeare on up, and maybe before. It's a measure of my illiteracy that I don't know nor about the history of writing, and I've not read as much as I used to, which I think is a deficit. I think because the written word stirs in every artist at its cross discipline some sense of, how marvelous that has been described in words, and it's something I've tried to do, but I have to try again. I have to stretch my capability. In a sense, it's something to strive for, but not everybody is a great artist. There are a lot of great technicians. My God, I mean, talk about it. I'm impressed by it, but it's been going on, Jeff, for at least 20 years.
Yeah, that's just about right. Because I started my career in 2002, and I feel like mine, people my age.
I looked at your work, and I like a lot of things like that. I'm not trying to salvage my diatribe.
No, I appreciate that. That means a lot.
I think there was something in your hand, and maybe in your deficits, that makes for something interesting, because it clips the sense of the convenient realness of everything, and it keeps getting, oh my God, isn't that how real that is? You know what I'm distressed about? It's taken the atmospheric qualities dictated by a photograph and used that without question. Oh, this is something that, because there's no inventiveness in it. I think, I don't know about you, but commissioned portraits have been, I think, the most challenging for me. And I haven't done that many. I've done 60, 70. And I'm faced with the question of, who is this person who I don't know, and who I may not like, who I'm asked to make a salutatory image of.
Yeah, I agree with you about portraits, particularly official portraits. I love doing family portraits because they're fun. The family enjoys the narratives that I come up with. But official portraits, with few exceptions, I've done a few that I don't feel this way, but there's so much ego wrapped up in it. And it's just like, I don't want to be part of this whole ego trip you're going through right now, showing off your power.
It depends on the person.
There are exceptions, and I've done a few that are exceptions.
It's also the occupation. For example, doctors, lawyers are full with that kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
But academics tend to be far more self-examining, far more self-aware. And the last portrait I did, which I finished back in 2023, was with a guy with whom I became enormously friendly. We talked about everything under the earth, things that were, as a matter of fact, pertinent time, including the horrendous political events of our endangered species in America. And the painting I did of him was, he and his family loved it. One of the characteristics of a successful portrait, and the guy is a professor of now I'm just forgetting the title, public health. Okay, and he was involved in a lot of research with Anthony Fauci, whose name you might remember.
Yeah, I think we
who worked on AIDS, and he was first ranking. I forget the discipline would be, but it was anyway dealing with infectious diseases. And he was just a nice guy who I could relate to, and it showed up in the painting. And then I stopped and I said, I don't know whether apparently everybody, and I'm not sure what it was, everybody who viewed the painting was very enthused by it. So, and I look at it again and I say, I did a painting of a guy sitting in a chair like that, like talking to you. And there's a sort of almost a twinkle in his eye because he had a sense of humor about official positions and so on. And that can only come from a real world encounter. It can't come from a camera. And I assure you, so much of what is involved in a lot of painting is camera-based.
Yeah.
I mean, and it doesn't have that sense of a mistake that can happen. And you look at something and say, no, gee, I got the proportions all wrong about that. So you build up another level of paint on top of it. All those things that happen with paint maybe are speaking some occult language to everybody. And it reestablishes the authenticity of that dual kind of cognitive event. Is both that you look at something and say, oh, that looks just like him. And at the same time, it's not him. It's a recreation. And the camera interferes with that because it stops the back and forth. I work from photographs.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. I know you do.
Body stuff and so on. Or sometimes when it's saying, I can show you a half a dozen photographs I took of a woman jurist, a wonderful woman, that she came to studio 2 or 3 times, just as she would have come more, except something called COVID-19 interrupted everybody's travel. And so in advance of that, I took photographs of her, and I swear to you, I looked at a woman who in the studio looked like she weighed 110 pounds, and she gained 30 pounds at least in the photograph. And it's a camera that's an ordinary digital camera. And it's worse, by the way, with iPhones.
Oh, yeah. I agree.
I mean, they are dreadful. Even to try to get, first of all, to get vertical and because even now on the screen, I'm getting this kind of distortion, right?
Yeah, iPhones are mostly wide angle.
And my body is being, because the screen is tilted slightly forward to account for the eye and the camera. And if you don't really intuitively know that, you can replicate it.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, eyeball vision is not, it's not totally accurate, clearly. And it's certainly with mine. I tell you, I make mistakes in proportion. Historically, I've done drawings where suddenly the distance between shoulder and bended arm is like up to here.
Yeah,
But I
we've all
never
done that.
noticed. That I just never noticed. Well, it's in what I guess I always hate to call it a sketchbook, but because it's not. Sketchbook lets you off the hook, right? It's only a sketch. I mean, it's not like finished thing. But I think it is. It's a finish of your observation under a short amount of time. And it tells the viewer something of what you think is important in the drawing that you're doing. Is it the body gesture? Is it the look in the eye? Is it something else? Because that's a selection that's taken place almost intuitively. And so if it's a bad drawing, it may be that your intuition was all fucked up, but it's okay. I don't take bad drawings out of what I call sketchbooks. I leave them in because they're markers.
That's a great segue. Can I show you something real quick? I don't know if you,
sure.
I don't know if you remember this, but do you remember when you gave this drawing to me?
No, I didn't.
When were you at BYU? When did you come to BYU? Was it 2000-ish?
Yeah, it was 2001.
Okay, so I was still in college, and you had this unbelievable show at BYU. It was life-changing because, in 2000, like I started to say earlier, my generation, I felt like was the first generation to actually start to make a living as realists, as a generation.
Yeah.
And now it's becoming increasingly more popular. But
I was
scared
competitive.
And competitive. But I was scared out of my mind. And I remember seeing your work at BYU and just being like, wow, who is this guy? He's proving that this can be done. And it was all these guys on bikes, like road bikes and stuff. And
yeah, I floated in from Mars.
Anyway, you did a speech that night.
That show, actually, I made a book.
Yes, I own it. Yep. I got that book.
And it's a nice story you have.
Well, you know what?
It to you, huh?
You gave it to me. And so what happened was you did a lecture and then you were and you did a drawing demo. And then you were flipping through your book of drawings it was like a loose paper, then a portfolio. And you were flipping through drawings like this that weren't finished or just in your portfolio. And this one, you had spit on it a little bit when you were drawing. And so you just gave up on it because you had ruined it in your mind. And I came up to you after and said, Mr. Silverman, you know that one that you said that you ruined? I said, can I buy that from you? And I was only like in my early 20s. And you said, you can just have it. Oh my gosh, you made my day. You made my year. Like I was freaking out. Yeah. So this is hanging in my bedroom now. It's been there for 20 years and I treasure it.
Okay. Yeah. I'm glad you have it. It's not dissimilar to the work in this a book that was put together when I did a drawing exhibition at BYU. It was in 2006. And it was one that traveled, as a matter of fact, to the Butler Institute, then went to the Lyman Academy.
That actually might have been the time, actually. I might have mixed up the two. So it was probably the 2006 thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But in any case, the drawing book it was made into a very handsome book. And then I just acquired about about 40 copies that were left over from BYU had published the volume, and I decided to claim it. They asked if they had unsold books from the second edition, and I put them up online, and there was only like, out of the 44 books, there's only 10 left. Okay. So I still have some currency, is the wrong word. I have presence in some way, which every artist
Oh my
wants.
gosh, you certainly do.
No, well, it's hard to know. It's fading a little bit. It's having a kind of it's like, who is Phil Rizzuto's? You don't remember. He was a wonderful shortstop for the New York Yankees in 1935.
Well, of course I don't remember. I was born in 74. Yeah, that's different. That's different because you're still here and we all know who you are.
Well, at times. It has to do with the numbers of people working and the fact that it can be very, I understand how challenging it might be, because people like yourself have developed skills that are very compelling, and they're very attractive to people. Say, oh, wow, how is that done? That's wonderful. And I think that there's inherent competition. Listen, when I was a youngster and I went to music and art high school, I understood what an artist's life was going to be like. I got to be better than him.
You got to be good, that's for sure.
Perhaps, and it was not out loud. It was not something I admitted to. I admit to it now. It was egocentric. It was the beginning of Trumpism. See, the whole world centers around what I do. And after all, isn't it part of the experience? Your whole life is built on the idea of somebody congratulating you, telling you how wonderful you are. You, meaning I. And so we're all egocentric in some way. Some of us become awful. I mean, it becomes overbearing, and you could feel it. You say, what kind of schmuck is he? But, by and large, we all do try to be better than the next guy. I would say, although I may be wrong.
I think I can't speak for everybody, but I can relate. I mean, it's no different than any other job, because if you're applying for a job as a lawyer,
or I come, Duncan.
What's that?
I said it's a line from a movie. But I won't repeat it because people won't know it. I forgot the name of the movie.
But anyway, the point is there's competition in every field. I think the difference in our field is you mentioned it, and that's that people care, collectors at least, care what we think, and if you're not careful, it can go to our heads. And so you're right, it can be really egocentric.
It's double valued, I think. It fades very quickly. One compliment after another that I got 25, 30 years ago and so on didn't compensate for where I think any artist is at some point in life. I'm not talking about just a visual artist. I'm talking about someone who's trying to create some kind of world of convincing experience out of nothing, out of words, out of notes on a page, whether it's a guitar or a horn or a combination of those. And I think the relationship between all of the arts is a significant one when they are exercising some part of our humanity and our observation in concert. Who we are as people in a world of people, in a world of experience, in a world of conflict, in a world of love. All of those things are universal, and they appear in music as well, which is more abstract. And it's no coincidence, by the way, a lot of physicists are good musicians. that there is something about the harmonies of science and the ones that relate to musical combinations are built into a genetic receptive structure.
Don't you think there's a scientific aspect to painting as well? I mean, it's problem solving.
To some degree. I think I'm talking about a kind of logic. What is the logic of this image in relationship to what my experience is and how it connects with other people's experience?
Mm-hmm.
So the logic of it, sometimes it's stretched to a point where you get expressionism. People say, no, this experience is not 1-to-1, it's 1-to-10. It's barely in the realm of connection. And I think that has produced a lot of interesting art. People who, and you know something that's curious, all of these kind of periods of art history that are convenient for art historians are, in a sense, they're not very useful. And especially if you read the text, for example, the great art history book that's like a standard in all art history courses, it's called History of Art. It's interesting. And it's not an history of art. It's history of art. It's like, it's a huge volume. And it's written by, I can't remember his name, and now his son has taken over. And if you read it, it's only about periods of art that have been put together in a kind of framework. Like this was Romanticism, and this was late Expressionism, or this is something, but it doesn't tell you anything about what the paintings are really like, why they fit that conundrum, and on and on. So that's another little gripe about the authorized history of art. It's complicated. It's complicated by the fact that, you know, different people wanted different things from art. They wanted different ways to illustrate what was important in their world, and it was usually from wealthy people and from the reigning aristocracy. So that you...
Can I ask you a question about that? So that's true. People do. The artists want different things too. So how does one know when art has meaning? You know, because your critique, and I don't disagree with you, but your critique is that people are so focused on academic drawing and painting that they're not saying anything with their art. But how does a viewer know the heart of the artist? How does one know that there is or isn't meaning in an image?
It's very tricky. I can't explain it. I really can't. For example, I was just thinking of one thing that Jacob Collins did that was like a dramatic change from what would have been the tradition of Dutch still life painting, the fusion of all these wonderful goods that society could provide. You know, the different kinds of fruit, vegetables, and everything else. And he did something which was sort of revolutionary. He painted a cube of butter in a dish and focused it on it somehow or other as elemental, as fundamental. And he was locating the disposable in a way and saying, this is really important. This is important. I could make a wonderful image about this that can show you how important it is. And it was transformative.
But one could argue that that's been done many times. I mean, I've seen many mundane subjects, you know, glorified or elevated in a painting.
But not one.
No, I have. I've seen, yeah, you know,
Yeah. Okay.
like
Okay.
take Odd Nerdrum, for example, painting the brick, right? Or like a
Okay.
skinned rabbit, you know.
I, I, I stand corrected.
Well, and I'm not here to
Yes.
correct you, but but
No,
it
no,
goes
no,
back to
it's
my
okay.
question.
It's okay. It's a limit to my experience, and I should have known that. I just found that, and here's
Yeah.
the thing, that it was special, that it
Yeah.
made a break between even what's his name, Skinned Rabbit, and the painter, who I thought also
Odd
was
Nerdrum.
interesting. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I've been doing Jeff's online mentorship program for about a year now, and it is awesome. Everything is online, super streamlined. If you can be there, I mean, you have the ability to talk to him once a week and he can review your work and help you. If you can't be there, it's pre-recorded. You can go back and even re-watch things if you missed something during class or couldn't be there. So the online portion of it is almost better than real life because you can always go back to it, which is awesome. The demos are recorded. It's just like all available whenever you need it. And I'm a stay-at-home mom of 4, and my time is limited, and it's also very interrupted. And so to be able to go back has been clutch for me. And you get to work with Jeff HEIN, who's awesome. He's tough. The assignments are simple, but difficult, and they're difficult to make us all better. And he's able to give us these assignments, coach us through it, help us stay excited to progress. And so it's just been a great experience. I am so grateful that he has been willing to take time away from his own art to offer all of us to have it. So if you're thinking about doing it, it's amazing.
To learn more about how you could have me as a personal mentor, check out the link to HEINatelier.com in the show notes or video description. I agree with you, though. It's always interesting when an artist breaks away from what they're accustomed to and does something a little bit.
And it's not calculated. It was, and I know Jake from very early on, from the days in Brooklyn. I called Jake because just, I don't know, got familiar to call him that way. And I know it's something that he had thought about as a young artist, about how to use the skills that he saw so embedded in late 19th century work to deal with his world. He didn't say that in so many words, but I know he wanted to grab it, say, here's the tools. I can do so much with these tools.
Mm-hmm. Burton.
So,
go ahead, finish your point, and I have a question for you.
No, that was.
I'd like to know about you personally a little more, because we kind of went right into philosophy, which has been really interesting. But I've always been curious about you as a person, because you were born in 1928, correct?
Yeah.
And I mean, what would Picasso would have been? That was like 50 years before his death, or 46 years before Picasso died. So Picasso is when you're born, Picasso is like the big deal. Not to mention, the modern art is just all there is. That's all that's accepted in your early life, right up through the whole 20th century. I mean, it didn't even start to get hold. Realism didn't start to get hold of the art world until like 2000-ish or late 90s. So most of your life, so 70 years of your life, you're pushing against that. So how did you have the courage to do realism in that environment?
Well, I think it was because of illustration. I took comfort in the fact that here was a whole body of work, not only that abounded in a lot of children's books, for example, the Wyeths, that determined on the book I would read. Treasure Island, when I saw the pictures in Treasure Island, I wanted to read the book. It was a curious kind of reversal. It's not like I want to read the book and, oh, look at that, that's nice in there. It acted in reverse as a pull. There was something about seeing the world in pictures done accurately that turned on a thing in my head.
But what were you thinking? Like when, when you went into it, I mean, what did your parents think? You're like, I want to be an artist. And
they were scared stiff. They were scared stiff, but I went ahead. The idiosyncratic quality of that whole thing is that they were children of the Great Depression, my parents, and they wanted all their children to have secure positions. What were they? Teaching or some form of the arts that had performative qualities, like a musician, like you could always play at weddings and you could always be hired to perform somewhere. But even the meagerest kind of skill. And of course, the other things were to be academically trained, but not in philosophy and not in physics, but in medicine, because you got tons of Jewish doctors because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And they were all geared to some kind of practical survival. The Depression was an enormous impact on people's vision of the world. And
do you remember the Depression?
No.
Yeah.
I was very isolated, as a matter of fact, as a kid. I didn't even know what's happening. The other thing I remember, people talked about Charles Lindbergh at the first flight across the Atlantic. You know, the most topmost issues in the world. Or that the current fear of a disease called poliomyelitis or infantile paralysis. Every parent in that period of time, in the 20s and the 30s, grew up with the dread of summertime. That's when polio spread most prolifically. And if your child got through the summertime into the fall, it was a sigh of relief.
That sounds awful.
And it was. I mean, you know, when pictures finally came out of Franklin Roosevelt, who had polio, he was the greatest kind of signpost of the malevolent possibility of that disease. I mean, he's crippled for life. And so it was in 1930, what was it? And I'm getting it wrong. It was 48, the Great Flu epidemic.
So you've lived through some epidemics. Jeez Louise. Yeah. So you would have been 23-ish when that happened?
Yeah, yeah.
So you definitely remember that one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. People lined up all around the block of New York City to get vaccinated.
That's wild. Man, you've experienced a lot of stuff.
So, you know, personality was determined in a way by family thinking. And even so, my wife thinks it's insane. She said, "You mean to say you actually believed in God when you were 13? My wife was a dissident from the time she was born. Why? Because she kept asking the question, why is that so? She couldn't participate in sports because her mother told her, no, only boys do sports. And she kept saying, well, why is that? And her mother would say, that's just because the way it is. I mean, that was the trap that girls were born into. she wore skirts, you know, in minus 20-degree weather. I mean, with really cold weather. There were lots of days in the early 40s, 50s, where there was 0-degree temperature in New York. People didn't have these wonderful packed coats and, you know, defenses against winds and so on. I remember meeting my mother, who was, probably in her 60s, right here in the neighborhood where we live on West 70th Street. And she was a great walker. And it was a period when there were at least 2 or 3 days of 0-degree weather in New York City. And she only wore what it was her traditional cloth coat. It was a wool coat, but it didn't have any padding, it didn't have any lining, it didn't have a hood. Okay. And she was walking, and so I said, "Hi, Mom, how?" And she said, "You know, it's getting a little chilly."
Just a little.
And she didn't mean it as a joke.
It was like 25 here yesterday, and it's dry cold, and I was dying. I can't even imagine.
Well, we become habituated to warmer climate. When was the last time you saw snow in New York City? Well, last week we had like a quarter of an inch of snow that disappeared because it was melted like 2 days later. I remember as a kid, the streets were lined with banks of snow that froze because the street cleaners came, plowed the streets, plowed up, but it stayed cold. And we used to have snowball fights behind these bunkers of snow.
That's good stuff.
And
yeah, we did the same thing growing up.
It was wonderful that you expected that.
Yeah.
The winter would be banks of snow on the street. In the last 10 years, I don't know if we've had more than whatever, 3 or 4 inches of snow, and it disappeared very quickly.
No kidding. Jeez.
Yeah.
So how did you get educated? Your parents weren't on board. How did you learn how to paint?
Copying.
You taught yourself how to paint pictures, the way you paint.
Yeah. Oh, that. Again, because of the model presented by the illustrator.
Wait, but you didn't go to school? You didn't have a mentor?
No.
That's remarkable.
The closest thing to his training was in the High School of Music and Art. And you know what? There was not one art teacher that was committed to realism in that school.
Yeah.
It was all about the new art that was coming in. And this is just about the time of Pollock, 1942, 43.
You know, that still hasn't changed. If it's a public school or even most private schools, it's still that way.
No, it's a public school. I had a lot of talented people. The people I met, 3 of my 4 friends at the time were classmates in music and art. And it was a strange combination of kids who were committed to drawing realistically. We used to illustrate the yearbooks in conflict with all the things that were, I can remember an emotional experience that was very interesting if I think about it, because it all has to do with identity. And I remember one of the teachers who saw one of the things I was doing in class. It was very contrary to what he was thinking. And he came up to me and said, "Yeah, that's nice stuff. But," he said, "I want you to start thinking about what you really feel about this image. What do you really feel about it? I mean, all the detail is getting in the way." And I said, "Well, I really don't like to do that. You know, I'm intimidated by a teacher." And he said, "Yeah, why don't you try it? Go ahead, try it." I figured I'd get graded on the basis of whether I was compliant.
Mm-hmm.
And I always became nauseated. I finally said, I can't do it. I don't know how. I don't know how. So he left me alone. But it was so much of a wrench between who I felt I was in making these images that everyone could see. When I went to, oh, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. I did have training when I was, my parents, again, screwball parents, hated for me to be an artist, sent me to Pratt Institute Saturday classes when I was 10 years old. Okay, wanted me to get training. They figure if he's got this mishigas, which is a nice Yiddish word for craziness in his head, let's at least make him good at it.
That's good parenting right there.
Yes, but it was a wrench for everything they believed was a safe kind of parenting to have.
Yeah.
Anyway, went to, they were Saturday morning classes. I don't remember very much what it's like. Oh, I remember some guy who's like 2 or 3 years older than me. It may just a couple of years old, but he was very imposing and very self-assured. And he kept criticizing one of his things I was doing. He kept pointing down at this. You got that wrong. That's not right.
This as a
You know,
teenager
you
or
want to be
at
an
Pratt?
artist, that,
Is that Pratt?
what is that?
Is this at Pratt when you were 10?
At Pratt, yeah, Saturday school. Yeah, yeah. And then it changed. I took Saturday classes in high school, or the evening class. It was a sketch class. I went to drawing classes at the Art Students League. But I don't remember. I had teachers who didn't teach me anything at all. If I looked at their work, it was because, they looked a little bit like N.C. Wyeth. That's okay.
Hmm.
When I say that a little bit, it meant it was an image I could relate to that was realistic.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever question whether going into realism was the way to go?
No,
No.
I didn't. It's really, well, I told you the anecdote about the teacher telling me to try to paint what I feel.
Yeah.
And it was a violation of my genetic structure and my ego, if you will. Like, who did I feel I was? I was that person. When I went to Saturday morning classes, I was at the league as a kid. They were kids' class. I was allowed to go into the life class, and I did drawings of nude women. And I used to take them home and show them to all the kids in the neighborhood who I knew, Like I wasn't good at sports, so I needed some kind of celebrity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I used to go, hey, come on, Bert, got all those nude ladies, those naked ladies.
That's great.
They were naked. They were not nudes. They were naked.
I wish I had a picture of you back then. I'm trying to picture it.
Oh,
great.
I looked like a child from much of my adult life. My graduation from college, I looked like I was just entering high school. I was very immature looking for.
That's how I was too.
Years.
Yeah.
Yeah. I now have some sense of weight because, I got all these creases and everything else. So my features are all recognizably old man. So it's,
yeah, but you don't look 96. So it's, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not complaining about that.
Yeah.
Look, the ordinary things that you do without thinking about. But I was just lifting that painting that you saw on the easel. It was we stored someplace because I have to do something to. I have a thing about offering it to this guy who was originally painted because I want to get it off my hands. I don't want to just leave it in the racks and it's enough so that he might have another museum at hand that needs
yeah, why not?
So I was going to doctor it a little bit. and offered to him. But it's a heavy painting. The frame, it's not that big, about 40 something inches. And it's got a big frame around it. And I started to lift it up, and suddenly that shoulder.
Oh man, I'm sorry. You're getting old sucks, huh?
Okay. I mean, it's not heavy. Let me tell you something. But so all the measures we have of time and space are corrupted. So maybe the paintings I'm doing will reflect that. And that's not terrible either.
No.
That connects with so many other people whose experience is in some way, I was going to say diminished, but I would say moderated by their own activity and how they do it. I mean, I am a great fan of basketball, and I can't imagine these human beings flying into space. Some guy's doing a dunk on something which is 10 feet high. If you look at my ceiling, it's 10 feet high, and the rim of the basket is up there. And I say to myself, I'm living in a different world. I'm living in a world of the seven dwarfs.
Yeah, you're what, 5'6" or something? How tall?
No, 5'4".
5'4".
Yeah.
Yeah. Those basketball players are monsters.
I lost 2 inches of height, actually. I used to be.
You used to be 5'6". Okay. I only know that because we've met in person. I just remember.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the surprises. I am your signpost of the future. Of your future.
Yeah. Well,
look on my works, Ozymandias and despair.
Not a chance, man. Not a chance. You're a constant inspiration. And you'd said that, I can't remember how you put it, but what I took from something you'd said earlier was that you're not sure how relevant you are anymore. And I don't know if you realize, but just in telling people that I'm talking to you today, the response was extraordinary. I mean, everyone knows who you are still, but also you probably don't see this in yourself, or you probably don't see yourself this way, but you're like the godfather of realist painting. I mean, if people like yourself, Max Ginsburg, let's say Daniel Green, some of you New Yorkers that were doing this when no one thought it was cool, if you didn't do it, people like me probably wouldn't exist. This whole generation probably wouldn't exist, because I mean, we all looked to people like you when our teachers at universities were saying, no, realism is not legitimate. It's not a legitimate art form. And then we would see your book in a bookstore and go, whoa, well, Burton Silverman says different. So suck it.
Well, listen, I would be a liar if I didn't find that very pleasing to hear.
Well, it's the truth.
But I just feel the things I was talking about very initially, I debated whether to talk to you about that online, about my sense of increasing fears about the realist movement.
You're not alone in that. We all see it. I mean, I think that the one thing there's a lot of things. A lot of good things came out of the 20th century and modernism. I like a lot of abstract and modern work, and I think that it brings a lot to the table. But it also lacked something. It lost, in many cases, not all cases, in many cases, it lost craftsmanship, and craftsmanship was just gone for a century. And now I feel like there's a huge chunk of the art population that's just said, you know what, screw modernism. We just want to show off how awesome our skills are. And they've thrown modernism out the window. They've thrown everything good about it. They've thrown the concept and the design out the window, and all.
I understand that.
Yeah. So a lot of us are with you on this, but I'm hopeful that
look, with every movement, there's a dynamic called change. And we don't know what it's going to evolve into. One of the things about realism that in the 1980s, there was a whole period that was articulated. It's in the art history book. It's called photorealism.
Yeah, what do you think of that?
Interesting thing, huh?
What do you think of photorealism?
The interesting thing, I was looking at it again, and I said, what's the difference? Because the same skill in painting and reproducing what we see and so on, and the accuracy. I thought there was an underlying kind of critique in it. The empty, glistening coffee shop, the empty streets with the reflections, no one in it. I can't remember the name of the artist, and he's still painting today.
Wasn't he in the Hard Time show? Remember the Hard Time show from back in 2008?
Yeah.
Wasn't the artist you're talking about in that? No? Okay.
No. And it should have been, actually. Because another painting that the name I can't remember the artist. Of course, it's just unfortunate reiteration of this whole interview. He did a painting of a camper with a horse linked up outside. And it was a dissonant image. Why is this? It was a white horse linked up against the camper. And the matter-of-factness of it was jarring. It's like, holy shit, there's something about this that speaks to the incongruity of our contemporary life that I latch onto. I paint a lot of things that I suddenly think are my favorite word is anomaly, that it doesn't really connect with everybody's expectation. And I thought, I don't know whether this was something cognitively aware that the artist was painting, or he had a program. It is, you've got a hard road to hoe.
Mm-hmm. I think it's hard to do anything of meaning in your work. I think that's the problem. It's because learning the skills is a linear process. It's just, you can see the goal at the end. It's very objective, but trying to put something more than craftsmanship into your work, that's where the art is. That's the elusive part of it, in my opinion. Is it just me, or the rest of you guys also get weirdly excited when you order new paint? Because I don't know about you, but when I get paint in the mail, it feels like Santa just dropped my Christmas presents off at my doorstep. With Vasari paint, my paint of choice and the podcast sponsor, it's even more exciting. And let me show you why. Because when Vasari shows up, it comes in this incredible box where each tube lays in this little compartment perfectly formed around the tube in this nice soft foam. And it's surrounded by velvet, red velvet. Now you got to ask yourself, if a paint comes so carefully protected and surrounded by red velvet, you got to wonder if this paint is worthy of royalty. It is. Vasari is. So if you haven't tried Vasari, you're seriously missing out. And the thing about Vasari, it's not only the best paint out there, it's also made by an incredible company that's been around for 30 years and knows its customer by name. Do yourself a favor, go to vasaricolors.com and order yourself some for your next painting.
You know, I'm reluctant to pursue this because it may sound like I'm critical of Max, and it's not my place, really. But I've talked to him personally about it, so I felt I had some license. But for any artist, anybody dealing with a contemporary event, you're locked into the contemporaneity of it. It's like, how does it manifest itself in ways that you wouldn't expect, that were almost anomalies? Very early in the 30s, who was the artist? He did a painting of a guy sitting on the sidewalk, slumped over, and you could see behind the people walking.
That Hopper?
Was it? Must be.
I'm not a great historian, but let's just say that.
No, it may have been. I have to look at it again.
Okay.
Too many images go by this lens. Whoosh. And it struck me as being somehow or other so powerful as a way of dealing with the unemployed, that they were refuse almost on the sidewalk. They didn't exist anymore. They fell into a mass. But you didn't have to paint the mass. You just had to paint that individual sitting on the sidewalk. So he's down below where people usually look or encounter one another. And that seems like an intuitive kind of understanding of what the unemployment person felt. He was discarded. He was no longer part of the human group. That makes sense.
It does make sense.
Think, won a prize, and justly so. Small painting should have been larger. Because again, it falls under the rubric.
Oh yeah, that won the Draper Prize, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because it impacted on people in a very special way.
It did.
It wasn't a salutary picture of a thoughtful old man,
I don't think he knew when he painted it would be so impactful. I think he meant it as a study, and then it became something bigger.
Exactly, because it just focused on this one individual in a certain point in life where he wasn't beautiful. He was an exposed old man who didn't want to show his body, except he was a model.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like he revealed himself against his own best wishes. I think there's a poignancy in that. And I think that may have been an accident, but was a lucky one, certainly.
Yeah. I think a lot of times our best paintings are a little bit of luck. A little bit. Well, let's. I want to look at some of your work before, because I think pretty much everyone knows what you do, but just on the slim chance that some of our listeners don't know what you do, let me pull up some of your work real quick. So this is your website, burtonsilverman.com. Is this a good place to look, or should we look at Instagram?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
All right. So we'll go to recent paintings.
When I did this painting, it was a while ago, before the prevalence of so many female performers and musicians. You look at on Facebook a lot, people showing constantly of women playing the guitar, beautiful, beautiful guitarists. And this was what I asked her to pose. I was trying to get something about combining the lyricism of the beautiful woman with the skill. It wasn't just she was by herself exposing her contours, but she was doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a performative act that I thought made a difference in how we thought about women generally and about those skills.
Yeah.
And, it was even in the fabled 60s and 70s when a lot of women folk singers came in, but it was like it faded out of memory. It's no longer there, but it faded out of painting memory. And I think that's one of the reasons. There's other things that I did about women and nudes that I thought
I want to look at some of those. I know what you said about nudes, how, it gets tiresome when you see too many, but man, you have done some beautiful nudes.
And except you look at the expression on her face, And
That's
the fact she's
remarkable.
wearing a G-string and this black collar. And so she's a stripper, you see? So I was trying to conflate the beautiful nude body with something that was kind of like, oh, it's a hooker, that kind of thing.
So you wanted it to be
I wanted to
relevant,
be a
relevant to
conflict.
today.
I want to be a conflict in perception. Like, oh, I did put those two together. I did a PowerPoint, and I showed some of Hopper's striptease painters, and the thing about it that I talked about when I showed it on, I can't remember where, was that they didn't have beautiful bodies like in nude paintings. And I said, suppose they were really beautiful bodies in doing these silly, strutting, provocative movements. I say, how dissonant is that? How anomalous is it that we conflate, suddenly we forget about the fact that we've been painting bodies without performance. One of the things about Manet's Olympia that elicited so much distress in France, that painting was virtually banned from French museums for 50 years. They wanted to sell the painting, and I think somebody like Sargent interceded, raised money to keep it in France. And why was it? Because it took the theme that Titian had made of, the gold coins coming down from gods to bless the nude woman, and saying, no, this is a courtesan. The black woman next to her with the flowers are usually the attendants on high-priced courtesans in Paris. And French population, the elegant gentlemen of 1870 Paris, went to bordellos all the time. Degas did drawings of these well-dressed, overweight, obviously patrician men choosing which girl in the lot he wanted. So I said to myself, I'm not some kind of Puritan. I don't hate nudity, quite the contrary. I love the female body. I think it's perpetually, unfortunately, constantly erotic in my view. But I said to myself, to paint it without taking notice of where that body exists now.
Let's see. I wish you had some of the paintings that, wait, is this the one that was in Hard Times?
Maybe, yes.
Yeah, that was an honor to show in that show with you back then. That was a good show. Oh, no kidding. But those bike ones, I wish you had the bike ones here.
Yeah, they would.
Because those are the ones that sort of changed my life. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that. So tell me, when you do something like this, I mean, it seems obvious that you have a relationship with photography.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So,
but do you feel that way?
No, not at all. It's just, imagine, okay, if I were to set this up, you're either setting up in the subway day after day after day, or you're taking a picture and bringing it to your studio. And I assumed that you're taking a picture and bringing it to your studio. That's the only reason.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like photography at all. And I think my assumption is that you've spent many, many years working from life.
That's one of the criteria, I think, that gets built in to your touch, much less to your awareness. I think, by and large, I don't make a diagram. I start out with just the generalizations. I remember I made the mistake, I think, but I did a workshop with Richard Schmidt out in
Geez, there's a powerhouse workshop.
Yeah. and we and we came to the point of evincing a kind of distinct way of viewing form, because Richard would start out painting the inside, the connections here, and I started out going like that.
The contours?
Yeah, not the contours, but the generalization. What I'd put some total things and so on, and where this would come and where the gesture was.
Yeah, he sort of starts with a nose or eyes and works out.
Yeah, and I start from the outside, Burton.
Yeah.
Because it's a way of investigating. It's right saying, oh, that's what they look like in general. When you meet somebody, you don't look at the specifics of their features. You don't even remember it exactly until you get the totality of the circumstance and the gesture where you are. And then you may start to notice like what somebody really looks like.
Yeah, my approach is much more like yours. I can't relate to working from the inside out that way. But one difference between you and Richard Schmidt, though, not entirely. Richard Schmidt often works from corner to corner, but in general, you're composing from corner to corner. You're composing the entire canvas. Whereas oftentimes Richard Schmidt will kind of vignette his paintings. He'll work on the focal point and just let it sort of bleed.
He does. It's dramatic.
Yeah.
In the sense that there's a lot of activity in paint. And I wish I could do that, actually. But he's very intuitive. He's a very skilled, gifted paint slinger. I mean, of the old-fashioned kind. The alla prima touch. It's like if it wasn't right, forget about it. The idea of working on a painting again. I have a painting he did of me on the wall behind me.
No joke. That's amazing.
Yeah, that was at that same session. We painted each other.
Wow.
I don't know if you can see.
That's the kind of stuff for the history books right there. That's it right there?
Right above my head. Yeah.
No kidding. That's amazing. Yeah, I hope someday that painting right there is in a history book, because one great painting another.
Well, it would have some interesting character, because I met a lot of people in the barrel of the movement that would be fascinating. The contacts were inescapable because of sheer commitment, and it was very genuine. It exists now. I'm sure you know people, again, who are companions in your struggle, in your...
Oh, yeah. All I have is artist friends. That's it.
Well, that's what you do. It's your workplace.
Yeah, it's all I think about.
There's another painting in this group that I thought was interesting about women, called The Mannequins. I don't know if it's on there.
Mannequins. Is it actually of mannequins?
Well, partially dismembered. This is a catalog from the show, by the way.
Okay. That's it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I can't find that anywhere. That's gorgeous.
Okay.
So what? Tell us about it.
Okay, you see the expression?
Yeah, it's sort of.
Okay.
Sort of melancholy.
And the characterization, I wouldn't think of. I think about all the paintings of young women that are painted today. Okay, she's at the other end of the spectrum in terms of look. Okay, hair is not.
She's an everyday woman.
Yeah, an everyday young woman. And what about her look? And what is she between? Okay, the exotic female dressed in.
Yeah. So you're juxtaposing her with the societal ideal.
Right. Yeah, and what she caught in, what's her goal? What does she feel like? Does she feel left out? I don't know. I put it there because for some reason I can't explain. I thought it was like if I were in her shoes, what would I feel like?
So when you compose a painting like that, do you know what you're trying to accomplish right off the bat, or do you just start arranging the model and then discover it as you go along?
It's pretty much what I thought about.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Is he in a hospital bed or something?
Yeah.
Wow, yeah, it's
a painting of my brother when he was dying.
Oh my gosh. I'm sorry to hear about that.
And here's another painting I did of a black person, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Not your usual. And say, I'm working in an environment where people are doing the same thing. And I'm saying, am I doing the same thing?
Yeah. So these are like figurative sticks of butter, so to speak. I mean,
This is a recent painting I did. Okay.
Yep. Beautiful.
And I got to tell you, the reason I think it's interesting is the
just lift it up a little
black
bit.
man.
Lift it up a little bit. Yeah, there you go.
The hooded black man.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. To you as a white person walking down the street, do you ever think, yeah, I'm a little uncomfortable about that. But what's that guy? Especially in New York, people have been pushed down the subway tracks, slashed and so on. A lot of them have been African Americans who did it. And I said to myself, okay, you see, he looks dangerous, but look what he's carrying in his hand.
I can't make it out. What is that? Is it some sort of a tool? I can't see it.
Yeah, it's a tool. He's a mechanic.
Oh, okay.
It's a portable drill.
Gotcha.
You see, and when you get down to the painting, what you look at first is up here, and then you go down here to say, oh, he's just an ordinary guy.
Yeah.
And that's the title of the painting.
Ordinary guy?
An ordinary man.
Tell me about this one. Well, go ahead. If you want to finish talking about that one, go for it.
No. So I'm inescapably drawn to something which is examining. I tell you something, all of us have some kind of racist anxiety. We don't confess it because it's not proper and it's not according to the liberal code. But there is anxiety about the other that's almost fundamental to we as living creatures. And you can't run away from it. The only thing you do is confront it. And that's what I'm trying to do occasionally, is to paint the forbidden. And I'll tell you something, it makes them difficult in the commercial market.
Well, a portrait in general is difficult in the commercial market.
Yes. Oh, well, look at all the paintings that have been sold now. These wonderful, beautiful women, you know, a soulful black man like myself.
Yeah, if they're beautiful enough, they're sellable. But if just the average person, a portrait of the average person, it's a little harder to sell.
Yes.
So you did this whole series. This whole series where you took photos into glass, which I thought was a really interesting series. What inspired that?
You know, I can't explain it. I really can't. I think at some point in my life, I thought of myself as a survivor. both as a painter and as someone who is stricken with a heart attack.
How many years ago was that?
Oh, about 24 years ago.
Whoa, good for you, man. And you're still kicking after that for 24 years. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, I had good treatment from heart doctors, but I kept active. The brother of Raphael Sawyer, was one of our idols back in the 60s and 70s. Painted street scenes, and he was a hangover from the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
And his brother was also an artist who died when he had what you call it, an acute
aneurysm?
Stroke? Yeah, a stroke, yeah. And he just literally died at the easel. He was painting, and he had a violent stroke and fell down, and he was dead. And I used to think, oh my God, how horrible that is.
Oh, I don't know. That sounds actually kind of good.
That's right. That's the track you're on.
Mm-hmm. I want to go quick.
A lot of people die very in extended agony.
Mm-hmm.
And they shouldn't be allowed.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm taking up too much of the time here.
Well, this has been amazing. Are you kidding me? I've got plenty of time, but I can wrap up if you're out of time for sure. I don't want to keep you, but I am curious.
Well, go ahead. About that painting.
Yeah. I'm curious about it because it's one of my favorites because it's I think it's a self-portrait, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's some time ago that you painted it.
Yeah, that painting is in a museum in Georgia. I can't remember which one. And I did it because I wanted to get. I had seen a painting by Lucian Freud that was a nude self-portrait. And I said to myself, talk about competition. And the stupidest idea, I said, I'm going to paint myself in the nude. I said, it was when he was quite old. And it was not, but it was a very sturdy looking guy. And I said to myself, well, I don't look as sturdy as that, clearly. I never
You look pretty good.
But, well, I was only a mere 70, so.
Yeah, you look pretty good for your 70s.
So I said, okay, but he was totally nude. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't brave enough to do that. But I thought, okay, I just gotten over heart disease, I'm still alive. And I said, let's be honest, that a lot of painting is done with a camera. So I have it with a camera, and that's why I could see the total of my body rather than just an ordinary mirror. And I was holding a brush or two in one hand and the camera in the other. And I'm saying, that's part of the tools I use that I can't escape, I won't lie about.
Right.
And also the idea it's reflected in this.
I love that about it.
Kind of conflation between the background and the reflected image and so on is clearly a kind of different way of seeing yourself as both real and not real.
And it's kind of hard to tell if you're inside looking out or outside looking in.
Exactly, which I wanted to play in the
You did that on purpose?
Yeah.
Dude, that's sophisticated stuff right there. I wouldn't even know where to start with making that illusion. Yeah, that's cool. Can I guess which it is? Or is it outside looking in?
Yeah.
Yeah. The only reason I think that is because of the light is so hard edged.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's obviously
and also
sunlight.
part of my on the left side, my figure is disappearing almost. I wanted to talk about the impermanence of all our existence, and that I was still a survivor to me was astonishing.
Yeah,
because I'd had some serious part I'd always been in very good health, I thought. Listen, I'm hanging on with other little.
I hope you make it to 100. I want to see you make it to past 100. You can do this. Hang in there. Hang in there, man. You know, there's a guy in Newburgh, New York. That's where I'm from, New Windsor, Newburgh. That was a barber until he was 108. He'd go to work. Well, actually, I don't know when he passed, but he was 108 and still going to work as a barber every day.
I think you take your life in your hands with a 108-year-old barber.
108, isn't that wild? You've seen a lot at 108.
Yeah. Well, it does give you a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've seen changes that are manifestly in contrast to what we have now. In many ways. I mean, living through the 60s as a 40-year-old man is really different than viewing.
You were 40 years old in the 60s.
Yeah.
That is nuts. That is nuts. Oh my gosh, I can't even get over that. So you have seen so much stuff. And what's crazy about you and people your age is that you were not just, it's not just that you've seen or that you've been around a long time, but you've been around during the most fast moving century ever. In other words, the advancements technologically have just been extraordinary. And when you were born in 28, you were probably, I mean, there were cars, but they were just tin boxes with a rudimentary engine in them back then, right?
I used to have a manual shift car, a stick shift.
Yeah.
I loved it. I loved being able to control the car directly. It's insane to me to sit in a car that wants to drive itself.
Oh, I know. I don't even like that. And I'm only 50. Yeah. It's weird.
It's insane. It's
disconcerting, if you ask me.
It's giving over authority of selfhood to a device, to an artificial device. And it's really horrific. Like everything else that we do now, it takes authorship away from our behavior and therefore responsibility.
Yeah, I know. You know, you could probably relate to this almost. You're not quite as old, but when it was around 2000-ish, you know, late 90s, around 2000, a woman I went to church with had a flip phone, and she was in her mid to late 90s. So she was probably born in the single digits or the teens at the latest. And she showed me a picture on her flip phone of her in front of this cabin in a barrel bathing with a horse and carriage behind her. And all of her siblings were just standing there. And it was like a daguerreotype looking thing. And all of her siblings were standing there in like these chaps and leather and like looking like little cowboys and girls. But she's showing it to me on her flip phone. It's just crazy how much stuff you've seen if you live through the entire 20th century. It's wild.
I still have a push button telephone on my desk, you know.
Do you?
And I saved a rotary phone also because I think it's going to show up as a valuable auction antique art for my kids.
We just threw a VCR away, which is bizarre, but that's not even nearly that old.
Well, you know, I mean, you show a dial telephone to a 5-year-old and they don't know what to do with it.
I know, it's bizarre. It is. Yeah.
They keep looking for the buttons to push.
Yeah, but you give them your smartphone when they're 6 months old and they can navigate it better than you can. I don't understand it.
Yes. Well, it becomes a form of genetic engineering. I don't know.
Seems that way. It's wild.
Yeah.
It's wild. Well, man, this has been a blast. It's seriously, I've said this about a few artists I've interviewed, and you're definitely on that list. And you're one of my bucket list interviews. So it's been a huge honor.
Is it okay that you didn't have the split screen?
No, I recorded the split screen. You just didn't see it. So it's all good.
Ah, oh, okay.
So what I want to do, though, is ask you one final question before we go. I ask everyone this. And I have a feeling you're going to have some good advice. If you could give one piece of advice to an aspiring artist that you either had or you wish you had when you were coming up, what would it be?
I would say to look at all the art history that fits your sense of how you would want to make a painting and settle on somebody. It's okay to have an image from that history, which is more likely to be something in a realist tradition. For example, look at Thomas Eakins and say, okay, do I want to paint those? Eakins was a very dry bones realist painter, not a lot of emotion in him. Is that the kind of painter you want to be? Look at somebody as flamboyant as Sargent. I say, do you want? Sargent was a much more perceptive portrait painter than would be given credit for, because he painted with a flourish on all, all the dresses and pertinences that particularly with women's portraits. And a lot of them are less interesting, I think, than is given credit for. But if you look at some of the faces, they're really insightful in a funny way. It's like a lot of these people didn't want to pose for him. It was an annoyance. And they masked it to try to look elegant and accessible. But there's something about it because he repainted the heads constantly. It wasn't just bang, bang, thank you, ma'am.
A lot of people think he did, which is crazy. To me, it seems obvious he was working and reworking.
But the eye was captured by all that light flickering over glistening dresses and things like that. Or the backgrounds, or the gestures or so. Didn't look at the eyes.
Yeah.
Well, but I'm saying it offers an enormous range of possibilities. I mean, I just think you have choices, and it's not bad to make. They all made choices where they could. Rembrandt went to the auction markets in Amsterdam to see all the Renaissance paintings that were being sold. I mean, the flip of it is that somehow or other you have to be stricken with a kind of genius insight, so you'll know exactly what you're supposed to be. We're all derived from something else.
If we weren't, we'd all be painting like cavemen still.
Yeah, and I think it's useful. I think it can be contaminating in the sense that you get so. I mean, people thought I was too fond of Degas, and maybe it was, but I lost that clearly because I went through a lot of other people in art history. And besides which, Degas is a much more interesting colorist than I am, because he opted for a kind of impressionist thinking about color. And that's not who I am. I'm much more depressed. But he was, he was just one stop. I found myself being more interested in Lautrec, as a matter of fact, as a painter.
I wouldn't have made that connection.
Yeah, I know. I didn't. Well, again, I was interested in how his thinking was compromised by his physical disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so he did very dramatic paintings of lesbians in the bordello. That was like not quite kosher. I thought, why not? I mean, he's a guy who knew the bordello himself. He knew the whorehouses. And it was okay until, of course, it was linked up to Titian. That was not good.
Mm-hmm.
So you see, I mean, the world is full of conflicted notions and feelings. And I think it's up to the individual to find their place in it and what their art can mean and how they want to do it. So I'm trying to link up two things, form and content, and put them together.
That's good. That's good. Man, I appreciate this. Thanks again, Burton, for doing this. It really, really means a lot.
You're welcome. And I hope it's not been too provocative for your audience.
No, I'm sure everyone's going to love it.
Okay.
Thanks for tuning in to the Undraped Artist Podcast. If you enjoyed it, subscribe. And if you could, leave a comment or review. That really helps the channel. Please share the show with your friends, and if you're feeling generous, consider a monthly donation at theundrapedartist.com. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week.